Have you ever questioned life when you are on an unwanted path? That's the issue we're going to be addressing today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Flourish-Meant is sponsored by Access More. Today, I have a lovely guest with me. Her name is Lori Ann Wood. She became an award-winning author who encourages deep faith questions along the detours of life after discovering a serious heart condition almost too late. Welcome, Lori. I am so honored to have you on Flourishment today.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here.
So tell the audience a little bit more about that compelling story about discovering a serious heart condition and how that caused you to question yourself, this unwanted path that you were on in life.
It all started about 7 years ago, a little bit more than 7 years ago. I was just feeling kind of sluggish. I wasn't feeling myself. I had children at home. I was still doing all the things and thought maybe I had the flu or pneumonia, put off going to the doctor for a little while. And when I finally went to see my primary care doctor, he took a chest x-ray and he said, if we're lucky, it's pneumonia. And I remember thinking those are words I'm going to remember one day for one reason or another. And it wasn't pneumonia. He discovered in that chest x-ray that my heart was very enlarged and it was functioning at about 6%. And this was completely out of the blue for where I was in life. If I had listed all of my health concerns at that point, anything related to my heart would have been probably not even on the list. And I had no risk factors. I had no lifestyle indicators that would point to this. In fact, a funny thing is, 3 weeks before I was diagnosed, I was told in a health evaluation that I had done that I had less than 3% chance of ever developing heart disease because I had low blood pressure, I had low cholesterol, I had no family history, I had no risk factors. And yet I found myself at my doctor's office with this diagnosis, and it was serious enough that he would not let me leave his office to go pack a bag. He escorted me to the hospital from his office, and I was direct admitted. And things just sort of started spinning out of control. I didn't know what was going on. I still, at that moment, thought I'm going to spend a night in the hospital and they're going to figure out this isn't a big deal and I'm going to be home the next day. But that was not what happened. I spent 2 weeks in ICU. And I had defibrillator pads stuck to my chest and a crash cart outside my door 24 hours a day. Really didn't understand how ill I was because I didn't really feel that bad. I think my body had just gotten used to functioning with that low level of heart function. And really nothing happened for about a year and a half. I was flown to Cleveland Clinic. I became my doctor's most critical patient there for a year and a half. She still treats me. She's still my doctor. And she actually wrote the foreword to my book. But at the time, I didn't know this. She told me later that when she first met me, my heart was the largest heart she'd ever seen. And I was her most critical patient for a year and a half. So I was protected from a lot of that, but it was a strange time. And the more that sort of started to sink in, the more questions that I had. I had health questions, certainly, but also I started to have a lot of faith questions because, I had been, I'd known about God as soon as I knew about my own parents. So I had been a believer for a really long time. And so when I'm going through all this medical stuff, when I finally did leave the hospital after those 2 weeks, they gave me a life vest, which is an external defibrillator that you wear that can shock your heart from outside your body. And I wore that for 9 months, 24 hours a day. And a funny thing is it came with a card and I still keep it on my desk because you show it to people to explain why you have this vest on, and it says, which I didn't read it at the time, but now I'm seeing it. It says, this patient is at high risk of dying suddenly. And I was just wearing the life vest, taking all these medications, which I still take. And then 9 months later, I got an internal device and hoping that that would help, improve my heart function. But I went for that 18 months with no improvement, no noticeable improvement. I had people praying for me around the clock, all kinds of the best medical care, but nothing was happening. And I felt this space open up between God and I. And I kind of hung in there, but there was a space. And then out of the blue, for whatever reason, I had appendicitis as an adult, and no one would touch me because my heart was so weak. And they said, we can't do surgery on you. And someone had the idea to check my heart one more time to see what its function was at that point. And to everyone's surprise, not the least of which was mine, it was showing at near normal. And I thought that was my story. I thought, I get it. My story is one of divine healing and God's provision and answered prayer. And I just was ready to tell that story. And then 3 years ago, my heart function dropped and I found myself in active heart failure again. And what I've learned since then is that heart failure is a chronic progressive disease. It's chronic because it never goes away. There's no cure for it. And it's progressive in that it only goes in one direction. And what was happening when I had that near normal reading, I was still on my way down, but when you're on your way down, you can still have these spikes. And I was in one of those spikes, but my general trajectory was still down. And so now I am at a plateau. I'm at a lower plateau, but I'm holding steady. And I'm blessed to be a really high functioning heart failure patient. And what I learned from that was a lot about heart, which I never thought I was going to need to know, but a lot about faith and a lot about faith questions as well.
The symbolic nature of this can really lend itself toward discussions of faith. Did you find that ironic or something that revealed to you what God wanted your message to be to the world?
I don't think I saw it at the beginning. The funny thing about how this started is a friend of mine dropped by a little spiral notebook to my ICU room. And I think she intended for me to write down, questions or instructions for my kids or questions for the doctor. And what I found myself doing is waking up in the middle of the night with all of these angsty kind of complaints to God or questions, or I don't get it. Where are you? I'm not seeing you in this. And that notebook, I just was getting rid of it. I was getting it out of my mind. And my husband said, you need to be writing all of this down, everything that's happening. And I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to relive it. And when time sort of started to heal that, and a couple years later, as I started writing just different faith issues from my blog and articles, I realized that there's 3 questions. And I was getting feedback from people saying, those are my 3 questions as well. I don't have heart failure. I'm on a different detour. I lost my husband, or I have an adult child that's estranged, or I'm in bankruptcy. But those are the same 3 questions I have. And so that's when I knew that this writing that I was doing was actually not so much about my medical events, but it was about those questions that had formulated from the writing I was doing.
When we are experiencing issues with our spiritual heart, sometimes those are connected to the issues that we're experiencing by being on an unwanted path. It triggers doubt in our minds because we're not in a place we expected to be. What are the main three questions that most people ask when they are in spiritual heart failure or they are on an unwanted path or both?
Yes, I found that the three questions that kept coming up for me were, and they can be worded in different ways, but the three questions that I had were a question of worry. First of all, and I say worry, but really it's about the permanency of life. And is this life all there is? Because we make different decisions, we make different choices if this life is all there is, obviously. So I'm revisiting these really basic questions that I felt like I should have known the answer to decades ago, but I'm revisiting them as an adult, as a believer who's been there for decades. And so the first question was, is this life all there is? And the second group of questions that I found were coming out of this were a question of doubt. And that is God always good? Because right now it doesn't feel like God's being good to me. Does that mean I'm not good? Does that mean God sometimes isn't good? How does that inform my faith? And then the third question that came out of all of my writing was a question of control. And that question is questioning if God's plan's enough. And the strange thing about all of these questions, as I'm finding them, and I had them on sticky notes and they're all over a wall, and I realized at some point when I'm rearranging all those sticky notes that those are the same three issues that Jesus faced in the desert right before he began his public ministry. And we often, call those temptations, but anytime you're faced with a temptation, it's actually an internal question. You're saying, is this worth it? Should I do it? You're weighing something. And so those three questions also presented themselves to Jesus in those temptations. And so when I realized that and got feedback from readers that I'm feeling that too, I knew that that's how the book should take shape.
I love the depth and the relevance of those questions. This is fascinating. And I know that listeners are going to want to get a copy of your book and connect with you to hear more about this. How can they do that?
There's a books page on my website, which is loriannwood.com. And the books page is loriannwood.com/books.
Thank you, Lori. And thank all of you for listening. I hope that you found reassurance and grounding in this conversation with Lori Ann Wood. And of course, I also hope that you come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant. Flourish-Meant is part of the Spark Media Network and can be found on the Edify app.